Hi, everyone. My name is Paris. Welcome to the second episode of October's edition of Meet Our Contributors. Woo! Today is our special episode of the Steering Committee Ask Us Anything. We have some awesome panelists here today to answer any questions that you might have related to governance, steering committee stuff, projects, project-related business. I'm sure Erin will even ask or answer test flight questions. Feel free to address us with anything and we'll try to take it. I have at least 5 questions queued up right now for my direct messages on Slack. Just a reminder, if you are listening out there and would like to ask a question, do so in the Meet Our Contributors Slack channel on the Kubernetes instance. Or if you are following along on Twitter, feel free to hash us with K8SMOC for Kubernetes Meet Our Contributors. First off, we do have a code of conduct that does apply to all of our communication platforms. And since we're interfacing with Zoom, YouTube, Slack, and Twitter today, that's a lot of them. So please be excellent to each other. And then panelists, don't forget you are allowed to ask each other questions. So feel free to jump in at any point as well. And then that's it. So we'll move on to intros. First person that I see in my screen right now is Aaron of SigBeard. Why don't you take it away with an intro?
Hi, everybody. I'm Aaron of SigBeard, also known as Aaron Krickenberger. You may have heard of me through co-founding SIG testing on the project. You may have seen me talk about Graph of the Week or various automation things during the community meeting. I've been involved in the Kubernetes release process since 1.4, and most recently, I am the release lead shadow for 1.13. I currently work for Google on the engineering productivity team, or GKE. Brendan, how about you next?
Okay. Hi, I'm Brendan Burns. I have been on the project since the beginning. I am currently, on the project I work, in addition to the steering committee, I lately have been working on client libraries. So if you use a non-Go client library, except for Python, it's something that I've worked on. Not that I don't like Python, but just that someone else had already picked it up. I work for Microsoft Azure and coordinate a number of teams there, including the Kubernetes service and our upstream work as well.
And then Tim.
Hi, I'm Tim St. Clair. I've also been on the project since the very early days. Originally, I had worked at Red Hat, and now I work for Heptio. I've been involved in a number of SIGs over time, depending upon the stage and growth of the organization and the project. In the beginnings, I was SIG lead or co-SIG lead for SIG scalability as well as SIG scheduling. And in recent times, I've worked on sub-projects for SIG testing and I'm leading up efforts around SIG cluster lifecycle, which is basically trying to unite the clans around kubeadm-ish type things. There are many ongoing efforts in SIG cluster lifecycle.
Awesome. Thank you to all of you for joining today. I know you all have very busy schedules, so we will get on with it. First things first, today is the last day for the election. This is the second election for Kubernetes for Steering Committee. So what are your thoughts on the overall process this time, and how did you make a choice to use DevStats and the 50 threshold?
I was going to hand off to Tim for this one, since I think Tim and Quentin were in charge of working on that process.
So it was difficult because there's no clean signal that we have for everybody that contributes. It's really tough. So, we looked at all the different signals that we had available to us, and the one that seemed the most all-encompassing, that provided the most fair opportunity across all of the organizations, was to use the rolled up DevStat number from across the entire orgs. So that seemed like it would be fair to everyone who participates. And it also encompassed people who didn't just do PRs, but also did, just commented on issues or triaged issues, because we know that there's several different types of contributions. And the first thing we noted too is that there's no way that this is going to be all encompassing. There are people who do lots of other work that's not directly related, but is very beneficial to the community. So we still have the exemption process, and that was a holdover from last time. We used the same procedure as we did from the previous election. So our plan there was that we wanted to make sure that it was fair and it was very clear what the threshold was, and that we always provide an opportunity for other people to join. But we also wanted to make sure that with each iteration, we didn't want to have this sort of grandfathered cycle for every single iteration. We wanted to make sure that people who are actively contributing have a voice and say in the community. And people change jobs, they go here and there, and that doesn't make a lot of sense for, I'm still a PMC member on Apache Mesos. I probably shouldn't be, right? Because I haven't contributed an ounce of code in forever. So we wanted to make sure that that was also something that we thought about as part of it.
I think there was a fair amount of debate as well over whether or not we were going to be able to accurately measure the value of different people's contributions and whether we should weight accordingly. So I think the decision we ultimately came to is that more is better, that there may potentially be some bad actors or some people who are gaming the system who get caught up in this. The dev stats metrics, despite my suspicions, it turns out they don't actually include emoji reactions, so you couldn't have just hearted your way to the number of contributions. But I do know of a couple people who have spread hundreds of single line, single typo fix PRs across a litany of our repositories to make it appear as though they are high volume, high value contributors. Now, ultimately, it's fine, whatever. A typo fix is honestly a really great way for a first-time contributor to go through the code review process and see what that's like. So it's not like we want to actively discourage that. And so we ultimately came to the decision that one vote should be equal. So the one thing that we steering committee members were allowed to do was vote, but we vote with the same strength, importance, what have you, as every other member of the community, because it's important to us that ultimately it's the community's voice that guides us.
Brendan, did you have anything to add about the election?
I guess the only other thing that I think it's important to add, and we talked a lot about last time, but it's worth highlighting again, is that there's always been an exception process, that we never felt like we would ever be able to get it right, fully right. And so I don't think we want to be in a situation where, we're standing up and saying, this is the perfect way to do things. And, this is the only way to do things. But we do need something. And so we try our best. And then we have an exception process for people who feel like, what, the process you defined didn't recognize my contributions. So I think that's important to note also.
Two other things I just wanted to point out. One, I found it really helpful that you had Paris, you as an election officer opted to go with the process of checking in the list of voters into GitHub. It was a really one-stop shop answer for me for people who are like, wait, how do I know if I'm eligible to vote or not? I could just send them to that list, and I could send them immediately to the exception form if they thought they had done something of value that wasn't accurately captured by DevStats, which was great. Number two, I don't recall hearing this much discussion about campaigning or platforming or what last time. And honestly, I can't remember if we even talked about this during the last Meet Our Contributors, but we had a fair amount of debate on how actively we should be allowed to promote ourselves as candidates, both those of us on the steering committee and those of us not on the steering committee. And we opted to lead by example where you haven't noticed me going around saying vote for Pedro or anything. I have tried to remind people to actually vote in the election because I like getting out the vote. But I really want people to vote for who they believe the best candidate is. And I think that having the process include a pull request of your platform in 300 words or less has been great. So.
Another just side topic for those who are interested or think that there wasn't a lot of thought involved or there. I've heard analogous things in the community where some people have mentioned that it feels OpenStacky or we're trending down an interesting OpenStack path. But one thing I want to stress too is that this is actually a document that you can PR against in the steering repo. So if you have suggestions, comments, or how to improve the process, absolutely feel free to submit a PR, and the steering committee will then reevaluate if that makes sense for the next election cycle. So as Brandon mentioned, I don't know if we're ever going to get it right, but that doesn't mean we can't refine and get it better every single time. So if you have questions, comments, complaints, concerns, the best way to do that is to submit a PR with your suggestion on how to make it better.
Yes. And for those listening and you are eligible to vote, you still have a few hours left. I feel like I'm just like beating the drum at this point. But yes, you still have a few hours left. If you, for whatever reason, realize you all of a sudden do not have a ballot, we're still here as well. community@kubernetes.io. Awesome. So let's close the book on the only election question that I had. All right, the next came in, and folks want to know anything new that happened since the last time you were on Meet Our Contributors, which is about 4 to 5 weeks ago. I've seen a lot of discussion about working groups. Anything get finalized or merged in the last 4 to 5 weeks, steering related?
So I know we are basically, I think, at the second wave of SIG charters. I believe most of the outstanding SIG charters have more or less been reviewed. I know I got pinged personally by somebody for SIG multi-cluster, and I saw a notification that SIG AWS's charter is out there. And I saw a friendly poke from Quentin Hoole on SIG Testing's mailing list about us not having a charter there. So I don't have hard numbers in front of me, but we're very close to the 50% mark, if not further there. And I think it was really helpful to just boil it down to, we're not trying to solve all the world's problems, just reference this document that kind of has the standard set of boilerplate for governance stuff. And then let's try and focus specifically on code and binaries and processes, both in scope and out of scope. I think that's been super helpful. There was a lot of discussion around working groups. I think I'm probably going to let Brendan and Tim talk more in detail there, but we did manage to at least decide that the ongoing effort to move all of the Kubernetes project infrastructure out of Google's hands and into the CNCF's hands is going to be done as a working group, since it seems like it's something that encompasses work owned by multiple SIGs, such as release and testing and architecture and contributor experience. So I will be drafting up a charter for that, and I believe that's all I have to say for now. Brendan, you look like you were going to go next.
No, I just think that there's a lot of good work that's been done on the definition of various groups in a PR that's pretty close to merging or may have already merged. That's the progress that I think we've had on working groups and stuff like that.
I think the one thing I want to highlight too is a lot of the effort from the Code of Conduct Committee and getting that bootstrapped and going. There's been a lot of effort that's been ongoing there, and feedback back and forth between the steering committee and the Code of Conduct Committee. It's not easy doing these things. It's actually very, very hard. And I would just want to give a shout out to all the efforts, especially for Michelle and all the work she's done with regards to getting that Code of Conduct Committee in place.
Awesome.
One other thing I'll highlight is this is not something we necessarily were directly involved in, but I think it's a great example of how to work with the steering committee. The product security team wanted to put together a document that describes sort of their governance policies, because they've been operating under kind of a cloak and dagger, shadowy level of trust, and they want to formalize that to be able to rotate people in and out. And they had the steering committee take a look at that. So it was a great example of bringing kind of like a fully formed idea for an up-down vote from the steering committee. And that was a great example of progress. Also don't have hard numbers to point to, but I think that a large number. I think the GitHub management subproject has really taken the load off of the steering committee when it comes to approving new repos for different subprojects. We have been servicing a large number of those requests, and I haven't heard any complaints over lag time or complications in the process or lack of clarity or anything. So if anybody disagrees with that, I would greatly love to hear from you.
Or file an issue.
Yeah, please. Like that is definitely my default response for anything GitHub related is just come file an issue against Kubernetes org and we'll sort it out. It's really
it's where just because like issues against Kubernetes org.
Yeah, Kubernetes/org. I have a very tiny squirrel brain when it comes to dealing with these things. So if there's not an issue in one common place, I'm going to forget about it. And also, it's a queue that many people, not just myself, look at. So it's guaranteed to get dealt with.
All right. Next question is about KubeCon. At your levels, this individual wanted to know, what do you get out of KubeCon at this point? You are KubeCon.
Personally, I just go into the hall where there's like 4,000 seats or whatever, and I just kind of go, wow. That's definitely something. I mean, like it's remarkable that there's that number of people who are interested and eager to come and talk, and that's a real testament to the community. I think also one thing that's underappreciated perhaps is that, like, while we see each other on pixelated screens a lot, we don't actually see each other in person all that often. Even within the same companies, we are often very geographically distributed, and so it's nice to have a central place to come together. And then also, I love meeting people who are using the product and hearing about the problems they're having and the things they're struggling with and the things they find hard. I think, it's hugely valuable to get a sort of a reality check for someone who's like really has no vested interest. Like, I sort of have a vested interest in people liking Kubernetes, but a user has very little vested interest in being anything but honest with you about how your product is working. And that perspective is always extremely useful.
That's a good one. Tim, what about you?
I think I can probably echo Brendan's statement. I like getting the pulse of the raw feedback from individuals. Sometimes I don't tell anybody who I am and just ask them questions. Just, I'm kind of not high in the profile radar as much. If you're working the SIGs, you know who I am, but I'm not like internet famous, right? So if I kind of like to walk around and sort of shadow and listen to the conversations and get a pulse of what's going on and hear the raw feedback, because I think that's super important. Because a lot of times people don't always file the issues. Like, maybe they might work for a company that doesn't allow them to do those things, right? They might work for a private entity, and they might have problems that are there, or they think X could work better. And I think as open source developers and contributors and steering committee members, we kind of thrive on feedback, right? So that feedback is super essential to the long-term sustainability of the project, right? And for me, I think that's what I get most out of it. It's just talking with individual contributors, going around the hallway track. Just being honest, I don't actually go to most talks nowadays. I spend more time talking with individual people. But I think that pulse and that feedback loop is super important for any open source project.
And Aaron, what about you? What do you get out of KubeCon these days?
So I strongly echo Brendan and Tim's point. I was going to say that, like, first off, I consider myself a massive introvert. When I took the Myers-Briggs, the person giving me the results said, like, you could actually be a monk. You'd be fine on a monastery with zero human interaction. And I've never really enjoyed conferences until I went to KubeCon. And it's unclear to me what it is about KubeCon, but every time I go, it feels more and more like I'm getting to meet up with friends that I've been interacting with over the past year, and less like networking and making connections and whatnot. So I completely underscore the importance of the hallway track. I unfortunately unlike Tim, like the first KubeCon I went to, I got recognized out of the blue as that dude with the beard. So I wish I could have that low profile. And I think the point that
Brendan and Tim, cut it. Huh? I said if you cut it.
Got to stay on brand.
Okay. All right.
I think a point Brendan and Tim both raised is very important is the forum of feedback from real world users. I think the humanity and empathy can sometimes be lost when it comes to interacting with a faceless project via GitHub issues that seem to be ignored or mailing lists that seem to just not respond in any way, shape, or form. It's a lot harder to do that in person. And generally speaking, the reason there's not that much of a response on our end is because we're fantastically busy with a lot of stuff. It's not because we don't want to listen. And I do think it speaks to a need going forward to figure out the best forum and the best way to appropriately capture user feedback and find a way to turn that into actionable stuff. I often think that this is a very rich community when it comes to its contributors, but it perhaps can feel very insular to people who are actually using Kubernetes as a product. And I really want to find ways to escape the echo chamber. So, face-to-face interactions are definitely one great way of doing that. And then to circle back on the question, like from my level, speaking as a current steering committee member, at least as of today, like I really enjoyed all of the steering committee members getting together physically in the same room at the same time for an hour. That 1 hour we had at KubeCon Seattle last year was by far more productive than any meetings we had had prior to that. And often like kind of more productive than a couple of the meetings we had since then. But I mean, that was definitely when like we put the stake in the ground and really decided how we were going to operate, what we were going to do. I believe there are plans afoot to do something similar for KubeCon this year. It's just some of the things that we have to work through can't really be effectively dealt with for an hour every 2 weeks. They do require some focused, concentrated effort. And as fun as it can be to hash things out for 4 hours in a row in a room over some document or something, like it's important and necessary. And I do think that will give us an opportunity to really unblock a couple sticky questions. Don't ask me for examples right now, please.
Yes. And if you are a contributor, this is your plug for the Contributor Summit, which is happening December 9th and 10th pre-KubeCon. There's a lot of hallway track-like discussion that happens, especially on December 9th. That is pretty much a gigantic hallway track for 4 hours. So plenty of time to meet fellow contributors. Right now, we already have 220 people signed up. That's massive. Copenhagen, we had 190. So we have already surpassed that. We are quickly on our way to sell out. So that is in a Google form. If you subscribe to Kubernetes-dev mailing list, you'll be able to find it there. It's also in many, many other corners of the internet as well, but that's a quick stop for you. All right, so I have two questions that sort of relate to the path of a individual who wants to be a steering committee member. So I got pinged on DM. They said, I'm your average code contributor, at least right now. But they're very interested in the work that you've been doing, the governance, project direction, and things along those lines. How can they grow to be a steering committee member? Like, what's a path? What's a good path for them in order to get to where you are?
I don't know. I think everybody's just sort of a code contributor at some level, and then you find the next thing to volunteer for, be it shadowing on a release or taking on a project that someone mentions in a SIG call. Or, I mean, I think probably, I guess, attending a SIG is probably the next best thing. Find the SIG that's interesting to you and attend the SIG. I mean, because then you'll see, I mean, I don't know, I think there's definitely always requests for help on things. Some SIGs probably have more requests for help, but so like I think contributor experience, for example, is one that is sort of perennially out there looking for people who are willing to take on engineering tasks. It might not be the thing that's interesting to you, so you have to find the balance between personal interest and availability of tasks. And some things like SIG node, it's going to be way harder to break into that just because it's a very complicated piece of code, important complicated piece of code, right? Or API machinery can be extremely abstract and whatnot. So like I think you have to have expectations about where you want to go and the path that you're going to take. But it's pretty straightforward, I guess. It's not like there's a secret knock or something. I think sometimes people think there's a secret knock. I think it's just sort of show up and help.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel like I have a fountain of wisdom to espouse here, but I feel like commit to things and get things done is one piece of feedback. Like say you're going to do a thing and then actually do the thing, because there are constantly SIGs asking for help on this or that. Some of it's low hanging fruit, some of it's larger. I also want to make clear that it is extremely possible to get things done in this project without being a steering committee member. We actively want and encourage the style of governance that allows people to mostly get things done without requiring this. So if you want to stay a purely technical contributor, go for it. But I feel like the skills you'll need to be an effective steering committee member move beyond just exerting sheer force of will through a keyboard to get things done, and require talking things out with other people. So understanding when the tasks cross certain boundaries, who do you need to connect with and interact with? Have empathy when you are dealing with those people to understand both sides of the situation. Use the shoutouts channel in Slack to notice when people are actually doing awesome stuff across the project and show that you care and that you're paying attention. Find ways to get stuff off of your plate and hand it to other people. And I feel like these are all pretty common sense things for growth of a developer into a more senior role anyway. It's just, I think when it comes to steering the project as a whole, it tends to also involve not just specializing in one particular area, but becoming aware of how your impact affects different areas of the project. Yeah, I don't know if that made sense or not, but Tim?
And what about your advice for someone that's interested in governance-related stuff?
I want to echo pretty much everything that Aaron and Brennan said. I think the key there is empathy and arbitration. To really understand governance, you must have to have the lawyer's mindset, and you need to constantly think in the devil's advocate mode. And that's not a bad thing to do in SIG leadership either, right? So when you're leading a SIG and you want to you have a bunch of inbound RFEs for adding new features, going back and forth and seeing multiple sides of the coin of how you want to or could implement something, and then try to solicit feedback from multiple stakeholders and be the arbitrator, because that arbitration and that learning how to arbitrate is pretty much what governance is. Governance is learning how to arbitrate and find the happy path forwards, because ultimately it's about setting the ground rules for how we operate as an organization and how we sort of structure ourselves and govern ourselves, right? Because in reality, I think a lot of people think of steering as we're governing, but in reality we're divesting and giving responsibilities to different parts of the organization. We don't really try to lead from on high. We try to solicit opinions and ideas and try to push that responsibility onto the appropriate parties.
So what's the most difficult thing about being a steering committee member?
I think that from my perspective, probably the most difficult thing is the constant sense that we're not getting enough done. I think, as has been mentioned earlier, we tend to be really, really busy, and so that means we in some cases we move very slowly, and I think we worry, and we try very hard to sort of get out of people's way, but I worry sometimes that people are waiting on us, and we don't execute with a cadence that helps the project move forward. I do think that what Tim said about the thinking about all the possible consequences, that's also can be hard at times, or it takes effort. And also, I guess that we have an infinite capability for bike shedding, and I think we sort of alternate between who's the most frustrated about 3 other people bike shedding. Like sometimes you're the one bike shedding, and sometimes you're the one sitting in the corner going, "Guys, come on! Like it's been 45 minutes. Can we move on?" So I don't know.
Heard that.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I don't know how to quantify the one most difficult thing, but I think bike shedding is still our collective problem. Bike shedding or relitigating. And so what has been difficult for me personally is when to realize that the bike shedding is necessary, and that the discussion, while seeming circular and rat's nest like, may actually be productive. And so like when to step back and let the discussion happen versus when to get involved to try and see if we can move the ball forward or not. I don't know how obvious it's been from like the mailing list, but I generally try to stay out of bike shed threads on our mailing list. I try to like ask for yes/no decisions as much as I can, rather than try and hash things out on an email thread. And then part of that's just because like I'm not a great writer, so it takes me forever to write that stuff anyway. But I also really value everybody's time. And so I want to make the most use of our time by trying to ensure that we're saying yes or no to actionable decisions. I often find whenever somebody like wants the steering committee to figure something out, or hash something out, that is almost always a recipe for death, because we just spend so much time trying to articulate all the details and play all the devil's advocates. It's so much easier if fully formed work comes at us that is mostly correct, that we can say yes or no to. So yeah, Tim, I'm so curious. Like you were gleefully smiling there too.
It's pretty much exactly the same as yours. Like I think as I've been in this project now for 4 years, you get to the point where like time, never have enough time, right? And time is our most precious commodity. And sometimes the bike shedding can be laborious. It's necessary at sometimes, but sometimes you think it's too much. And knowing when you should do it and when you shouldn't, right? It becomes difficult. And whenever you get a group of like over seven or more, you're going to get some bike shedding inside of there. So I think I just want to echo Aaron's statement in that the steering committee is meant to serve and empower. So if people have ideas of how to federate that, come with proposals. That's a better way for us to have a more structured conversation around an idea, a concept, or how to get something solved.
Awesome. Yeah. For those who may not know what bike shedding is that are listening, are there examples or a short Twitter definition you'd like to give?
We have an emoji.
I think it's on Wikipedia, right?
Slack, come on.
So my canonical statement for bike shedding is, what does the color blue taste like? Go.
I think the basic argument or the basic definition comes from arguing about the color of the bike shed before you've built the shed itself, right? It's arguing about something that is irrelevant given the current state of affairs, and having that argument actively prevent you. It's sort of a paradoxical loop where the argument is actually preventing you from making the progress necessary to get to the place where you should have the argument.
Right. It's not that far off from the technical yak shaving, where in order to fix this bug over here, you have to go fix this bug in that library, which means you have to refactor this entire thing over here, which means you're working on this project here just to get one simple fix in over here. And before you know it, you're shaving a yak to do a favor for a guy whose library you're maintaining.
Actually, I think yak shaving is totally. I've always thought yak shaving was totally. That is the definition of yak shaving, but I feel like it's totally different than bike shedding. Bike shedding is like proactively worrying about the problem, like that there might be a yak somewhere in there somewhere before you even start down the journey.
Yes, and I think we fall prey to both of those. I think is what
bike shedding bike shed right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
There's also if you give a mouse a cookie, which is another version of yak shaving.
Yes.
All right. I have two questions, and then I think we're gonna wrap. All right. One, if you could name only one over-engineered thing about Kubernetes. Tim just died.
Is there only one? I guess that's the hard part. I guess the only one part is the hard part.
Yeah.
The internals of API machinery are so overly engineered. It's like that code is. So that's my take. There's like someone went really nuts with like aspect-oriented programming in there, and it's.
Tim, I think may have been just a +1. Do you have anything else to add?
I'm a +1. Once Golang actually has generics and Golang 2, I think a massive redux of API machinery is in order. That if I ever had to have a second, if you actually look at the internals of the kubelet and actually understand how it does its mojo, it's pretty intense. Over mojoed. So it's interesting.
Disk mount unmount is definitely go through the disk mount unmount logic sometime.
Yeah, CNI is another funsies.
Yeah,
you can see if you've ever actually seen how the ordering occurs inside of CNI. But those are probably the top two.
Aaron?
So I'm not I haven't actually ever looked at API machinery code, but I think I agree with the both of them. It's more like I want to have empathy because I'm sure there are real challenges that are being solved and worked around there, like the lack of generics in Golang. But it does seem like it's a very opaque area for newcomers to contribute to. Like I can never throw somebody new at API machinery, which
and the builder logic in kube control is crazy ass too.
Yeah. So
maybe it's all. Let's go with all.
My answer may not necessarily fall in the definition of over-engineered, but like over-organically engineered would be the E2E test framework. I know Tim St. Clair feels some particular pain here as well, since he's been trying to work on this somewhat, and there's an effort that's been going through the testing common sub-project of SIG testing. But it's basically one gigantic, highly coupled rat's nest of utility functions. And it was the thing that we had that provided convenient looking utility functions. And I think it's resulted in the project having entirely too many E2E tests that cannot possibly get extracted out of tree, and not enough unit and integration level tests that test the same business logic without having all the fun flakiness of environmental dependencies and clouds being cloudy and networks having, their usual level of reliability. But the code itself is really, really horribly tangled. There's a bash script that calls Ginkgo I guess if you really roll it back to like kubetest, our binary, we have kubetest, which calls a shell script, which calls another shell script, which calls Ginkgo with a bunch of flags, which I think then also can read in a config file if we still have that ability.
I think your description is officially over-engineered now.
Yeah, it's crazy. But that didn't happen all at once, right? It just it grew over time.
Oh, and Joe at one point wrote stack trace for bash. So that's over-engineered too.
Oh.
But necessary, actually, given the levels of bash, as Aaron describes, given the levels of bash in some corners of the project.
Oh, you kids. All right, I'm going to end this call with positive questions. One is in the chat right now, and they would like to know what's the friendliest code SIG. That's not SIG SIG, which is SIG testing for those that are listening, for a new contributor? Oh, I've got a hand up on Tim's side.
So we've been spending a ton of time on making it easy for any newcomer in SIG cluster lifecycle to just engage. And I think we've been really productive in getting people promoted, right? So in the beginning, it was it was one of the many things in Kubernetes that grew organically, and it grew really fast and became very popular. But then since I started working on it, my primary objective has been to we don't want to have a couple of strong people being the core contributors all the time. We want to be able to federate this out so that way newcomers can come in and just instantly crawl up the ladder and just be active and contribute. And I think it's a testament to a lot of the new VMware folks who have just jumped on in the last couple of months, who are just instantly productive. We have a bunch of other folks coming in from every single provider on the planet working on different cluster API stuff. It's been kind of crazy to see it grow. So I think I'm happy. I'm a little self-promotion because I'm helped manage that SIG, but we've done a lot of work to try and make it better over time. And other SIGs I worked on in the past, it was not that way. I think I've kind of learned from my mistakes over time and try to harness all that history and experience to try and push this forward to make it a little bit better.
All right.
So I think there's also some SIGs I highlighted Contrib-X, but there's a few others where the projects tend to be a little bit more one-off, and those tend to be easier to get started with anyway. You don't need as much you don't need as much history or contextual information in order to jump in.
Yes, we are very friendly folks at Contributor Experience. We do use a lot of emojis. All right, one of the popular questions for the last steering committee was, what's one thing that keeps you up at night about Kubernetes? So this question is the positive end to that. What is one thing that makes you wake up every day and work on Kubernetes? What's one thing that makes you feel super positive about it and you are full steam ahead?
The community. Literally, I really look forward to seeing what fun stuff is about to happen on Slack today. What new emojis has been created? What new insanity is happening in Contrib-X? I legitimately, it's a group of fun people to work with. I'm doing stuff that directly impacts them. Yeah, it's the community by far.
And Tim, sounds like you had a similar response.
Especially lately, I'll break down a backlog and I'll groom the whole backlog, and then I'll wake up in a couple of days and there's 50 PRs I got to deal with. I'm just amazed at the efficacy of the community to just take what's written up and go.
Yes. And I think Brendan's trying to get off mute. Yeah, there he is.
Yeah, well, I think just the same. And just the opportunity to help people do a better job with their, I get off on the users as well, right? The community is fantastic and the users are part of the community, but I'm excited to help people solve their problems with the software that we're building, even if they never contribute back. That's really exciting to me.
Yes, and that's also to Tim's point, that's also a call for, if you're doing issue triage, slap some good first issue or help wanted labels on your issues. That definitely helps to grow a new friendly community. There is another question in the chat. Aaron, I don't know if you might actually know this one. When you start a new project that, say, uses Kubernetes API, Kubernetes API machinery, or Kubernetes client Go, how do you prepare the Go package or equivalent for what you use for vendoring Go dev?
I unfortunately do not know how to answer this question. Tim looks like he does.
Yeah.
So I've done a number of projects. I almost always use DEP nowadays until the magic modules of upstream or whatever the new mechanism that Go actually decides. We typically use DEP on all our Heptio projects, and we always update to the latest version of Client Go for everything. And as a result, you will drag in the transitive dependencies you need, and the depth graph is finite. So don't try to depend on anything outside of Client Go. That's probably like my one, do not go here, do not enter here. Like if you try to extend the end-to-end test framework outside of, Kubernetes, good luck with that, because you're dragging in all of Kubernetes. So my general rule of thumb is use DEP and stick to the well factored paths of Client Go.
I mostly use TypeScript these days. No, but I mean, I think we've started work on a generated Go library that I think will hopefully over the next year become a replacement for Client Go and avoid all that stuff. Because I don't think that the internal library was really ever built for external consumption, broad-based external consumption, and so it's hard.
Yeah,
I also honestly most of the time just use go get, which makes me a bad person, I know, but it's easier.
There was discussion at last year's Contributor Summit, I think, of this idea of splitting up the Go clients into one that was meant for internal and one that was meant for external. Is that right, Brendan?
There was. I think that I think that the right answer is to just rebuild from scratch with a Swagger based one, and that's where the client. That's the Kubernetes client /Go project. It's not. It's got a lot of gaps right now, but that's I think the right way to approach it.
It's not perfect. I'll give it that. But there's you do get a lot of benefit if you do use it. There's a lot of details that are handled for you. There is a cost associated with it. It's not, if you're someone who likes to control the intricacies of what you're developing, Client Go is probably not the way to go, right? Some people will just, do exactly what Brendan had mentioned. If you're someone who wants to rely on something that's been vetted and has regular vetting intervals and has a well-defined release process, and you're using it in a well-defined, structured way, then Client Go will probably serve its purpose for you. I've used it. We've used it at Heptio consistently across all our projects, and it works well.
All right. Panelists, do you have any questions for each other? The next time we do a steering committee AMA, we'll have either 3 of the same, some of the same, none of the same, any kind of the above. All right.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening to us. I'm always amazed that there are people who want to come on and listen to us banter for an hour, but I'm glad, I guess, that people do. I hope it's useful.
Yes, we had over 150 watch you the last time. So it's pretty good numbers.
We should just, I guess we're better than Twitch. No, that's not true.
No. Thanks to Jeff. He's the unknown avatar that's sitting on the bottom of our screen right now. He is live streaming while George does other things today. But that's it. Thank you so much, panelists. We'll see you next month, I think at the 7:30 a.m. Pacific time. Not necessarily you, but peers like you. All right. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.
Thanks, everybody.